The door to the boardroom closed behind me with a soft click, and I felt it. That finality. The weight of 30 years of work, blood, sweat, and countless sleepless nights couldn't keep me grounded anymore. There was no comfort in the chair I'd sat in thousands of times before. No sense of accomplishment in the walls I'd built this company inside. Everything I'd worked for had turned into an oppressive silence, and it was all crumbling with the flick of a wrist. Her voice had been calm, almost too calm. Samantha Foster, the new CEO, sat across from me with that perfect rehearsed smile. I could see the way her eyes flicked to the clock every few seconds, her impatience barely masked. She was trying to keep her composure, but I could tell the whole thing was just an act. Her words were clean, carefully selected. I'd heard them before. Corporate talk. The kind of thing they throw at you when they've decided your usefulness has run its course. "I think it's time for a shift," she began, her voice smooth, calculated. "You've done a great job, but the company is moving in a new direction. We need fresh energy, new ideas. We're holding ourselves back." I didn't even flinch. I'd known this day was coming. The moment they brought her in, I saw the writing on the wall. When she'd stepped into the role 6 months ago, she'd made it clear she wasn't here for the status quo. Change was her mantra, a fresh perspective, as she liked to say. But as the minutes ticked by in that sterile, beige-walled room, I couldn't help but feel the tension of it all wrapping tighter around my chest. "I'm going to be appointing someone else as your successor," she continued. Her smile faltered just a touch, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "We'll need you to start transitioning out." The words hung there between us, as sharp as a knife, but not quite as heavy. It was what I expected. I'd seen it all before. People who thought that a change of faces would solve the problems that ran deeper than the company's surface. They thought I was the problem. I was the one holding them back. But I'd never been one for playing their little game of office politics. The truth was, I was tired. Tired of carrying this weight around for everyone else. Tired of the endless meetings, the stress, the fire drills that never seemed to end. It wasn't like it stung. It wasn't a punch to the gut. It was more like a release, a breath I didn't even know I was holding. 30 years of living in the shadow of someone else's vision, and now that I was finally free of it, I could almost feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. I looked her in the eye, my gaze steady. "Understood," I said. And that was it. No more words needed. I didn't make a scene. I didn't beg. I didn't plead for them to reconsider. There was nothing to say. The truth had already settled into the pit of my stomach, and I was fine with it. I stood up slowly, reaching for my jacket. My fingers brushed against the sleeve, feeling the old fabric, the memories of years that had passed in this very room. The seat that had once been mine. I could almost hear the soft whispers from the board members behind me, their eyes following my every move. No one knew what to say. They were all too caught up in the drama of it, but not me. I wasn't here for them anymore. I was done. I gathered my things quietly, papers, my laptop, the little personal items I kept on my desk. It felt like I was closing the door on a life I'd lived for far too long. I didn't say goodbye. No one expected me to. The company had moved on. The board had already made up its mind. I walked out of that room with nothing but a quiet chuckle in my chest. I walked through the halls I knew so well, passing people who used to be my colleagues, my team, my family. I could hear the soft hum of conversation, the low murmur of 1,000 little movements that had once been part of my world. But today, I was an outsider. Samantha had replaced me with Ben, a man I'd never met before, but one I was told was her hand-picked successor, a yoga instructor. I'd heard the whispers around the office about him, how he had no business experience, how his resume was light on substance, how he'd come from a completely different world. But the real shocker? I saw it with my own eyes that morning. Ben strolled into the office like he owned the place, all smiles and yoga mat tucked under his arm. He walked straight past the receptionist, his face lit up like he was on a vacation. When he reached the elevator, he asked, "Where's the mindfulness room?" with genuine curiosity. I almost laughed. The board had no idea what they were getting into. Ben wasn't cut out for this. He didn't understand the company, the clients, the market, or the weight of the decisions he was about to face. He was just a placeholder, a corporate puppet Samantha could control. I knew it, and they knew it too. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I didn't even feel a pang of regret. I'd worked hard for this company. I'd turned it from a small office with a handful of employees into a powerhouse. I'd negotiated deals that made millions, navigated crises that would have crushed other companies. And now? Now, I was walking out of the place that had been my life for 30 years, with my head held high. I didn't need to fight for control anymore. The company was already slipping away from them, and they didn't even realize it. They thought they could replace me with a yoga instructor, but I knew better. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. I'd expected them, of course. You don't build something like this without understanding how fragile it can be. But I didn't expect them to show so soon. I suppose I should have known better. They never gave it enough time, never understood the weight of what they were dismantling. The board members, for all their talk about fresh energy, were the first to feel it. I could see it in their faces at every meeting, the forced smiles, the strained handshakes. They tried to rally behind Samantha, tried to pretend like everything was fine, that her new vision was exactly what the company needed. But no one could hide the truth for long. Not from me. Not from the people who had built this place. I knew this company inside and out. Every deal, every negotiation, every employee's name, every break room conversation. The systems, the clients, the market we were in. It was second nature to me. But Ben? He had no idea what he was doing. Not a single clue. For the first few weeks, I kept my distance. I didn't need to be anywhere near that circus. Samantha had made it clear she didn't want me involved. "We're moving in a new direction," she'd said, her voice all corporate cheer and disconnection. "It's time for the new generation to take charge." She made it sound so simple, so clean, like I was a relic, a ghost from the past that had no place in the future. I offered to help, of course. Old habits die hard. I reached out a few times, brief, cordial texts, just to see if they needed anything during the transition. She never responded. If she did, it was with that same cold professionalism. I wasn't part of the plan anymore. I knew that, even if the board didn't. They were still trying to believe in this illusion. Then came Ben's first big meeting. I overheard it from the break room, just as I had overheard countless others in my time with the company. It was a casual conversation at first, but there was something about the way my old colleagues spoke that told me everything I needed to know. The tension in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife. They didn't know how to handle it, how to address it. They tried to be polite, nodding and agreeing, but the discomfort was obvious. Ben had no strategy. He stumbled through his presentation, lost in a sea of buzzwords that meant nothing. The numbers were wrong. The charts were disorganized. The questions he asked were beneath the level of this company. Things that should have been settled years ago. Things that a competent leader would have already known. He fumbled and stammered, trying to cover up the fact that he had no idea what he was talking about. At one point, he suggested hosting a company-wide yoga retreat for team building. I'm not kidding. He actually said that. Yoga. A retreat. The board went silent. You could almost hear the collective groan from across the room. They didn't want to say anything. They didn't want to admit what they already knew. They were trapped. They'd gone all in on Samantha's vision, and now they were stuck with her choice. They couldn't backtrack, not without losing face. But they were questioning their decision, no doubt about it. I leaned against the doorframe, watching it all unfold from the periphery. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. They were all too wrapped up in trying to make it work, trying to keep up appearances, to see what was happening right in front of their eyes. I could see it clearer than any of them. I wasn't just a figurehead in this company. I was the foundation. The systems, the strategies, the structure. They were all built on my decisions, my experience. I was the one who had steered this ship for years, navigating the rough waters, steering us toward growth and stability. And now, watching Ben flounder, I realized something. The foundation was starting to crack. I wasn't going to stand by and watch this place implode. Not when I knew how to fix it. I didn't want to. I told myself I was done. I'd built this company, put everything into it, and now it was someone else's problem. But the more I watched Ben falter, the more I realized I couldn't just let it go. This wasn't just about the money or the prestige anymore. It was about something bigger. It was about the legacy, about everything I had worked for over 3 decades. I could still fix this. I could still take control. I had no doubt about it. But the problem was, I couldn't just jump back in, not without making a scene. I'd made my exit. I had walked out the door with dignity, even though part of me had wanted to scream. I couldn't walk back in like nothing had happened. It wouldn't be that simple. So, I stayed on the sidelines. I watched. I observed. I let them dig their own hole a little deeper. Every day, I saw the cracks get wider. Every day, I saw more signs that this company, my company, was being run into the ground by someone who didn't even understand what made it tick. And every day, I asked myself the same question. When would the moment come? When would I step in, take control, and show them all what a real leader looked like? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew it was coming. It had to. Ben's failure wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. And when that moment came, I'd be ready. They'd all see. They'd all understand. But for now, I bided my time. I watched, waited, and let the tension build. Because I knew that when it all came crashing down, I would be there to pick up the pieces. A few months passed, and I watched as Samantha's so-called vision unraveled before my eyes. The idea of fresh energy had faded fast, replaced by the reality of a sinking ship. I kept my distance, but the walls were closing in. Ben's tenure as CEO was quickly becoming a joke, and the cracks were starting to show everywhere. The company was hemorrhaging clients, the product wasn't where it needed to be, and internal communications were a mess. I knew it was coming, but seeing it unfold in real time was something else entirely. People who once trusted the brand were walking away, their contracts canceled, their calls unanswered. New deals weren't closing. The morale inside the company? That was a sinking stone. I could feel it, even though I was no longer officially part of the team. I still had eyes and ears everywhere, and even though I'd stepped away, I wasn't blind to what was happening. I spent my days in my office, the same office where I had spent countless hours making decisions that would ultimately shape this company. Now it was nothing more than a relic, a reminder of what had been. But no matter how far removed I was, I couldn't just walk away. The company was part of me, and while I wasn't going to step back into the chaos, I wasn't going to sit back and watch it burn either. I knew that when the moment came, I would have a role to play. That moment was closer than I thought. It came one afternoon when I received a text from one of the board members. It was cryptic at first, just a simple message about a last-minute meeting. It wasn't a formal invite. It didn't have the usual pre-meeting pleasantries attached. It wasn't even signed. But I didn't need any more information. I knew exactly what it meant. Samantha was in trouble, and the board was finally starting to realize they had made a mistake. They wanted to discuss the direction forward. That was the line they had been using for weeks, but it was clear they had no direction at all. And for once, they weren't looking for new ideas. They were looking for someone who could save them. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I didn't need to. I didn't need permission. I was walking back into that room for one reason: to remind them who had built this place and who could fix it. So, I showed up, unannounced. The moment I stepped into the room, everything froze. The board members' heads snapped up, their faces a mix of surprise and discomfort. They weren't prepared for this, and I could see it in their eyes. Samantha, sitting at the head of the table, looked like she had just seen a ghost. Her face flushed with frustration, and she straightened in her chair, trying to regain control. "What's this?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly. "This is a private meeting." Her attempt to assert authority was weak. I didn't need to say anything. I could already feel the tension in the room. Everyone knew why I was there. "I think the board knows why I'm here," I said calmly, keeping my voice level, like I had done 100 times before. You can only bury incompetence for so long before it becomes a liability. The words hung in the air like a threat, but I wasn't here to make enemies. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to remind them of what had been built and why it was still standing, even if they didn't realize it. The silence that followed was thick. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, but none of them spoke. They all knew it too well. They knew this wasn't some overzealous employee coming to cause a scene. This was the man who had built this company, and he was back because they had messed up. I didn't come to make friends. I didn't need their approval. I wasn't there to hold their hands or tell them everything would be okay. What I came to do was simple. I came to remind them of the vision, the strategies, the partnerships that had made this company what it was. Ben didn't understand any of that. He wasn't a strategist. He wasn't a leader. He was lost in corporate buzzwords and coffee shop meetings, trying to sound smart while everything crumbled around him. He didn't have the experience, the wisdom, the grit. He didn't have what it took to keep this company alive. For the first time in months, I saw panic in Samantha's eyes. I knew I was getting under her skin. I saw her grip on the situation slipping, and I didn't need to push. She was already unraveling. The cracks were there, and she couldn't cover them up anymore. I wasn't here to destroy her. I wasn't here to rub it in. But I wasn't going to sit back and let them keep pretending like everything was fine. I was here because this company needed saving, and I was the only one who could do it. I could see the tension building in the room, the unease spreading among the board members. They didn't want to make a move. They didn't want to admit their mistakes, but they knew they had to. But the game wasn't over yet. I had more leverage than they realized. Samantha had given me the perfect opening. She had opened the door for me, even if she didn't know it. She had proven she wasn't capable of leading, and now they needed someone who knew how to take control. I wasn't here for power. I wasn't here for some petty revenge. I was here to make sure this company survived. Because no matter what Samantha thought, no matter how much she tried to push me out, this company was mine. I built it, and I wasn't going to let it fall apart just because a few people decided they needed a fresh face. The board knew the truth. They just needed someone to say it out loud. And that's exactly what I did. The next few days were a blur. Strategy meetings came and went, each one more futile than the last. Whispers filled the halls, rising in volume and urgency. I could see the panic setting in, but no one had the courage to speak the truth. Behind closed doors, the board was slowly coming to terms with what they already knew. Samantha had failed. Ben was a disaster, and everything I had built was slipping through their fingers. But even with all of that hanging over them, no one was willing to take the first step. They needed someone to lead them out of this mess. I wasn't trying to win them over. I didn't need their approval. What I had was simple: knowledge. Knowledge of the company, its history, its systems. I knew what worked, what didn't, and most importantly, I knew how to fix it. It wasn't about ego anymore. It was about survival. The more I watched the company disintegrate, the clearer it became. Ben was not up to the task. Not even close. His leadership was a joke. I'd seen him in action enough times to know that he was stumbling through the dark. He couldn't even hold a meeting without losing his way. The board had started reaching out to me, though they were trying to keep it discreet. They were running out of options, but they weren't ready to admit it. Not yet. They were still holding on to the idea that Ben would pull it together, that Samantha's vision would somehow work out. But I wasn't having it. I made it clear to anyone who would listen. Ben was sinking the ship. The longer they waited to act, the more it would cost them. Samantha, of course, wasn't having it either. She was stubborn, trying to shut me out. At every turn, she tried to discredit me. She spread rumors about my intentions, whispered in the ears of anyone who would listen, that I was old news, stuck in the past. It was all part of her game, a game she thought she was winning. But I wasn't stuck. Not in the past, not in the present. I was waiting for my moment, and I could feel it coming closer every day. I wasn't going to chase it. I was going to let it come to me. That moment came when Ben called an emergency meeting to discuss the company's financial losses. The numbers were a mess, but Ben still stood in front of the board, desperately trying to convince everyone that everything was under control. It was almost laughable. I could see his nervousness in the way he fumbled through papers, trying to make sense of the numbers that clearly didn't add up. His voice cracked with every attempt to reassure them, but there was no reassurance to be found. He was in way over his head, and I knew the board could see it too. I sat in the back of the room, watching the show unfold. It was painful to watch, but I had to let it play out. I had to let them see just how bad it was getting. They were already questioning him, but none of them had the courage to speak up. Not yet. As the minutes dragged on, I could see the frustration building on their faces. They were losing faith. You could feel the tension in the air. It was thick, and that's when I stood up. Slowly, deliberately. The room fell silent as the eyes of the board turned toward me. Samantha's face twisted with an emotion I couldn't quite read. Was it fear? Regret? It didn't matter. I had their attention now. I took a step forward, my voice calm but firm. "Gentlemen," I began, letting the weight of the words sink in. "You have a choice. You can keep this charade going, or you can make the only decision that will save this company." My words hung in the air, and I could see the realization start to dawn on them. They knew it. I knew it. Everyone in that room knew the truth. Ben was a liability. Samantha's vision was a fantasy. They were watching the company implode in real time, and they were just sitting there, pretending they could fix it with a few tweaks. I wasn't here to sugarcoat things. I wasn't here to make them feel better. I was here to offer them a lifeline. "The truth is," I continued, "Ben doesn't have what it takes. You're losing clients, you're losing market share, and you're losing your best employees. You can keep trying to prop this up with meetings and empty promises. Or you can face the fact that the company needs someone who knows how to fix this." Samantha's grip on the situation was slipping, and I could see it in her eyes. She was trying to regain control, but I wasn't giving her the chance. I wasn't here to play by her rules. She had lost the room the moment she started denying the inevitable. I turned to face the board, making sure they understood just how serious the situation was. I built this company from the ground up. I know what works. I know what doesn't. And if you want to save what's left of it, you need to stop pretending that things will fix themselves. You need someone who can navigate these waters, someone who has the experience to turn this around. The silence that followed was thick with tension. No one spoke. No one moved. But I could feel them turning it over in their minds. I had just laid out their options, and they knew they were running out of time. For the first time, they were listening. They were paying attention. I could see the change in their expressions, the dawning realization that I wasn't just here to make a scene. I was here to save them. The question was no longer if they would act. It was when. The final decision was inevitable. I'd been waiting for this moment, but I never anticipated how satisfying it would feel when it finally arrived. Samantha had overplayed her hand. The board, once divided in their allegiance, had seen the truth. The fantasy of her vision had finally shattered. Ben, with all his misguided optimism, was not the future. I was. I walked into the boardroom for the last time, not as an outsider, but as the one who had always been the heart of the company. My heart didn't race. There was no adrenaline coursing through my veins. There was only calm, the kind of calm that comes when you've already won, without having to lift a finger. I wasn't interested in playing games anymore. This wasn't about ego or proving a point. It was about getting the company back on track, about saving what I had spent 30 years building. The board members were seated, their faces a mix of uncertainty and regret. Some of them glanced at each other, exchanging quiet, nervous looks. Samantha sat across from me, her face pale and drawn. She had lost control. You could see it in her posture, in the way her hands trembled slightly as she held onto her notes. She wasn't the confident, self-assured leader who had swept in with her fresh ideas. She was broken. The weight of her failure was too much to hide now. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Samantha's voice trembled, almost pleading. Her mask was gone. I could see the desperation in her eyes. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I've been here before. I've seen what happens when you fail to lead." I paused, watching her flinch at the truth in my words. And I'm not about to let this company fall because of some yoga instructor. The room fell silent. Every word I said hung in the air, settling into the minds of the board members. They had to face the fact that they were losing everything, losing their credibility, losing their company, losing their clients, because of decisions they had made in haste. The desperation in Samantha's eyes only deepened, but I wasn't done. I turned to the board, letting my gaze sweep across each member. I wasn't offering them a choice anymore. The decision had already been made. The board, finally united, voted to replace her. The vote was swift, almost clinical, as if they knew what was coming. The room's energy shifted. The tension that had been thick for months broke in an instant. Samantha had no fight left in her. She had pushed too far, ignored too much, and now she was out of moves. Samantha stood up without a word, her expression unreadable, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She walked toward the door, but her steps were slow, reluctant, like she had just realized her whole world was crashing down around her. She didn't say a thing, not a single word. She just left. I stayed in my seat, letting the moment settle. There was no victory speech to give, no congratulations to offer. The board had made their choice, and there was nothing left to say. I stood up and walked out of the boardroom without looking back. This was mine again. The company was mine to lead, the place where I had spent my blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. It was mine, and it was time to rebuild. I made my way back to my office, the same office where I had spent 30 years making the decisions that had brought us to the top. I hadn't stepped foot in here in months. It had been left untouched, a ghost of what it once was. As I opened the door, the familiar scent of the leather chair, the smell of paper and ink, hit me like a wave of nostalgia. I hadn't realized how much I missed it, how much I had missed being in control. I sat down behind the desk for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. The room felt like home again, like it had always been mine. I took a deep breath, letting the stillness of the space wash over me. The weight of the decisions that had led to this moment didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like relief. I had won. Not because I was the smartest, not because I was the youngest, but because I had built this company. I had made the tough calls, endured the sleepless nights, and fought battles others didn't even see. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about taking pleasure in watching someone else fail. It was about the company, the thing I had built. And in the end, there was only one person who could truly save it. And it wasn't Ben. It was me. I leaned back in the chair, looking around the room one last time. The office was familiar, but it wasn't the same. There was a new energy in the air now. It wasn't just about putting out the fires that had been started under Samantha's reign. It was about rebuilding, about restoring what had been lost, and about moving forward. There was still work to be done, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I knew what needed to be done. I knew how to fix it, and I wasn't going to waste a second.